While most gamers have not even been able to get the regular 3080, we are already hearing rumors about a 3080 Super. Let's talk about why this GPU may actually come at a time where stock is getting better and you may actually be able to get one. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Remember to smash that like button, makes me happy, makes YouTube happy, and we keep producing content like this so you know when the newest GPU stuff is coming out. So today, let's talk about the 3080 Super. And now, it must be kind of funny hearing about a 3080 Super, 3070 Super, when we can barely get our hands on the regular 3080, 3070, 3090. GPUs have really been out of stock consistently ever since they launched. But there's actually good reason that we're hearing about these now, and it may actually indicate a little bit more of an optimistic and positive future. So first, what even is a 3080 Super? Well, let's analyze NVIDIA's history. Even though it seems like we're in crazy times with new powerful GPUs, believe it or not, a lot of NVIDIA's playbook and the way that they release items seem to be pretty similar to last generation with a couple of changes. So basically, to answer the question, what is a 3080 Super? We'll look back at the 20 series generation. For the first time, NVIDIA had produced these GPUs, the Super variant. These were, of course, the 2080 Super, 2070 Super, 3060 Super. They came, of course, after the initial launch of the 2080. They were basically a little bit of a rebrand, a refresh. The major differences, first, if we talk about the actual physical design, the GPU physical design did change. Something like the 2080 Super had more of a mirror finish compared to the regular 2080. And then, of course, they gained more power. That's going to be pretty much the way that these refreshes are justified. I think it actually makes sense for NVIDIA to do these instead of them quietly updating like a 2080 or a 3080 to have a little bit more VRAM, where it wouldn't really make that big of a splash in terms of marketing and people actually getting excited about it. When they rebrand it as a Super variant, even though the card is still fairly similar with just a little bit bump in performance, they can really rebrand it as a brand new launch, and that's going to get people completely hyped up about it. So if the 3080 Super is going to be anything like the 2080 Super, it's most likely going to see a small bump in power and performance, and of course in VRAM as well, possible 16 gigabytes of VRAM or even more likely 20 gigabytes of VRAM. That way it differentiates it from the current 3080, which has only 10 gigabytes of VRAM. And now in terms of pricing for something like a 3080 Super, while the previous generation 2080 Super actually maintained pretty close pricing, it was around $699 for the 2080 Super, much like it was for the original 2080. So we don't know if NVIDIA will keep the 3080 Super at the same price of the 3080, but I think with possibly prices going up this year due to the overall really huge demand, I wouldn't be surprised if the 3080 Super got a pretty decent bump in its price. If NVIDIA wants to continue to sell the 3080 at $699, of course, they would probably have to bump the price of the 3080 Super, maybe $799 or $899, and that, of course, will also influence what the price of a 3080 Ti is, and we're going to talk about that in this video as well. So let's address the 3080 Ti. I don't think if there is a 3080 Super, this isn't a GPU meant to replace the 3080 Ti. I think it's going to slot in right between the existing 3080 and then the 3090. 3090 likely will stay where it is as sort of the flagship, most expensive GPU. And previously, I thought the 3080 Ti would come in at $999. But if we view NVIDIA's history, let's say from previous generation, 2080 Super came in at $699. And of course, the 2080 Ti from NVIDIA, the reference model, was around $1,200. So now knowing that a 3080 Super will possibly be coming out sometime this year, I would say that a 3080 Ti makes more sense maybe at $1,100 or $1,200, because after all, a 3080 Ti is going to be sort of a scaled down version of a 3090, so it would make sense that it's fairly close in price. Let's say if there's a $300 or $400 difference between a 3080 Ti and a 3090, it would mean that basically at play here would be those extra 4 gigabytes of VRAM if the 3080 Ti has 20 as opposed to the 3090's 24, which could pretty much cement the 3090 as a really niche workstation type of card for content creators who really need those 24 64 gigabytes of VRAM, so that would make sense. It wouldn't cannibalize all of the 3090 sales, but I think most likely most gamers that want a high-end card would probably choose the 3080 Ti, because especially if it's cheaper with very similar gaming performance as the 3090, it would definitely be a better price to performance ratio performer. So if this theoretically may bump up the 3080 Ti price, I think the 3080 Super, if it comes in at $699, much like the 2080 Super did, that would of course completely take the 3080 out of the picture. Maybe the 3080 would be retired or at least kind of forgotten about. After all, it just has 10 gigabytes of VRAM, which down the line in a few years may prove to be a little bit of a bottleneck in certain 4K games and certain applications. Right now, you're absolutely fine with 10 gigabytes of VRAM. Very few games are actually going to allocate that and max it out, but in the future, we're definitely going to see games that really push the threshold, and having a 3080 Super is going to be significantly more future-proof. So that's certainly something to keep in mind if you're considering buying a 3080 now, or if you can wait maybe a little bit until later on in the year to pick up a 3080 Super. Certainly that's going to last you considerably longer. And then, of course, the question that we have to ask ourselves, why does NVIDIA have so many GPUs coming out? They seem to almost run into each other. For example, the actual real-world gaming performance from a 3080 to a 3090, it's actually not a huge significant amount, can be anywhere from 10 to 20% depending on the game. So then we can assume that the 3080 Ti to the 3090 is going to be an even smaller difference, and most likely the 3080 will also be fairly close to the 3080 Ti. But I think this makes more sense for NVIDIA to do for a couple of reasons. First, when they're manufacturing these GPUs, they all have different tolerances and different sort of levels that they have to reach in order to be binned as a certain GPU. For example, the 3090, as it's higher performing, is going to require from manufacturing the highest quality. It's going to be the one that's going to be the best binned. Anything that doesn't make it to a 3090 most likely goes into a 3080. But what if NVIDIA has various levels, almost like a little macro versus micro type of situation, where they have various levels that instead of dropping it down to a 3080, maybe it's not good enough for a 3090, but it could easily be something like a 3080 Ti or a 3080 Super, meaning for the same GPU that NVIDIA would now have to sell as a 3080, they can sell a little bit more expensive GPU like a 3080 Ti without letting all of those manufactured products go to waste. So in that case, it certainly makes sense for NVIDIA to have all these SKUs, even though for us as the consumer, the performance is really, really close in a lot of cases. And of course, you have to get into really niche cases like the amount of VRAM if you're a content creator to really see a justifiable difference. But on NVIDIA's side, like we mentioned, it makes complete sense. That way they can delegate what type of manufactured GPU goes where, and they just have more options for binning certain GPUs at certain levels, therefore definitely improving the prices and the profit they can generate with each item. And of course, another benefit, especially on NVIDIA's side, for having multiple SKUs and a lot of GPUs, that's going to be, it's going to stay fresh in sort of the consumer's minds. I mean, look at it. We're talking about the 3080 Super, and it's still really nowhere close to being released. We don't have anything really concrete, but what it does is that it constantly keeps these GPUs sort of in the news cycle. People are always excited about GPUs. It's the most exciting component of a gaming PC. Well, probably second only to the RGB. But in general, if they always have, super variants coming out, a Ti variant, it really keeps people engaged, and it keeps sort of NVIDIA in the mind share of all of the consumers, because of course they have to worry about AMD now, especially with their higher performing GPUs. And then of course, one of the biggest reasons that NVIDIA wants to release all of these different more powerful variations of their GPUs, even if they've just recently released the 3000 series, that's going to be the competition with AMD. AMD has a few GPUs that definitely slots somewhere in between NVIDIA's GPUs, where right now they don't have a direct competitor necessarily. Take the 6800 for example. Theoretically, it does perform better in traditional rasterization than the 3070, but it's not quite as good as a 3080. So in between there could be space for a 3070 Super to go right up against price-wise as well as performance-wise a 6800. Right now, you're either going to go with a 3070 or a 3080, so there's a pretty big gap there, and the AMD GPU is priced right in the middle. Same's going to hold true for that 6900 XT. That can help bridge the gap between something like a 3080 Super and the 3080 Ti. Now, I think in terms of performance, performance, it'll be hard to say if most people would go towards a 3080 Super or a 3080 Ti. Obviously, the 3080 Ti, when it comes to things like ray tracing and DLSS, is going to be the superior GPU to AMD, but since the 6900 XT does trade blows with even the 3090 in certain titles with traditional rasterization, we can only assume that something like a 3080 Super would certainly, while being competitive in ray tracing, would not be able to completely take on the 6900 XT. Then it's going to come down to how that GPU is priced and how available is it in the market. Now, when would a 3080 Super come out? Well, it's not going to be any time right now. If I were to guess, they probably would announce it sometime in the summer and it would come out sometime in the fall. That way, it would give it around a year from when the original RTX 3000 series GPUs were announced. And most likely by then, we hope that, even according to NVIDIA, they said that manufacturing and more memory availability may be considerably better by the third and fourth quarter of the year. So yes, maybe the 30 Super and the 3070 Super may be coming at a time where components are more available, and you may finally get a much better chance at getting one of these GPUs compared to the last few months where it's been really utterly impossible for most people to be able to get their hands at one of these GPUs at MSRP prices. So if you can't get a 3080 now or one of the newer GPUs, a silver lining is that eventually sometime this year there may be more availability of a more powerful 3080 Super, which likely is going to have more VRAM, generally better rasterization performance, and is just going to be considerably more future-proof. I guess the worst case now, you just have to wait a few months with whatever GPU you have now, but it does seem like the future may be a little bit better. I would say by the third quarter or fourth quarter of this year, hopefully we should see much better stock levels, as well as the introduction of these newer GPUs, giving us not only more performance, but hopefully more product availability as well. Right guys, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to smash that like button, helps the channel grow. Subscribe if you like content like this, and I'll see you guys on the next video.